kind of symbolic battles as it is about kind of hard material battles. So this symbolic boundaries approach tries to bring the two together, and oftentimes can find more about the conflict by looking at the symbols than by just looking at the hard stuff. So an example of this, of using the symbolic boundary approach about religion within a religious group, would be to look at, for example, those processes of how sects have spun off of churches. Remember, if we've talked about this, well, when the original kind of sect spun off of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, that being the Protestant Reformation, there's quite a bit of violence that ended up being wrapped in that, as it was these struggles over who was authoritative, what a church should be like, what human communities should be like. These are all these symbolic struggles within a religious group. So this is as basically the Protestant Reformation is happening, is trying to break away within the religious group that had been pre-existing. There were all these battles over symbols that were just as important as anything else in those battles. And a different kind of example of how the symbolic boundary approach kind of makes sense of conflicts between groups is, as we've read on numerous occasions in this class, if you go back especially to 19th and early 20th century, to anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-Mormon, anti-Islamic violence in the United States, we often see these moments as these struggles in communities where usually the majority religious group, which is usually Protestants of various stripes in these communities, were experiencing some sort of probably material worry with these other religious groups, but also symbolic worry about these religious groups not seeing God or society or schooling or marriage or religious ritual the same way, and so kind of struggling with those concepts of those different groups and using violence as a way to draw a boundary to say those groups over there and our better group is over here. This brings us then to this nifty little concept. It's called dramaturgy. It's probably a word you haven't heard much of before. It was coined basically by Erving Goffman, and what the phrase dramaturgy refers to is the fact that in social life, so either as individuals in our relationships or in relationships between groups across symbolic boundaries, there's a playing out, kind of a structure of drama that is present in any of these sort of interactive or conflicting situations. And what this dramaturgy concept gives us is that violence has a structure to it. We need to look at the context of where violence is happening. We have to think about how the people involved in violence are trying to express certain messages. We have to think about how those people involved in violence are thinking about audiences. So we have to kind of pay attention to what's the audience that violence plays out in, because that's part of the structure of violence, is trying to portray messages through violence, not only messages about yourself, but messages to an audience about who you or your group is. And then dramaturgy also gives us a little bit of sense of a way to think about motivation, that the way conflict and struggle is played out in society, the motives basically kind of become public. They become real through violence and through conflict. And so if we pay attention to the structure of conflict, the structure of violence, we can kind of try and work back and get a sense of what it is that's motivating, and no longer just saying, oh, it's either hard material interest or just symbols, but trying to bring those two together into dialogue, much as if we're watching kind of a dramatic masterpiece unfold in front of us. Okay, so let me erase this, and let me just kind of say some general comments about these readings. So the first set of readings, those the first reading that we read from Mark Juergensmeyer, is basically using politics for religious goals or reasons. Religious. Okay, and so in his book, terrific book by the way, he actually goes through, and this is actually before 9/11, and interviews all these religious leaders that have basically been involved in horrific acts of violence, is trying to figure out what's going on, like what what is it that pushed these people and the groups that they led to be involved in violence? Well, a key piece for Juergensmeyer that he argues is we have to look at the ideological structure or the ideas of these religious leaders. And what are some of the things he finds out? Well, he finds out that these religious leaders and their groups, they tend to think of themselves in terms of cosmic time, of God and the divine having this kind of overarching plan, long-standing plan for humanity, and that these individuals and these groups think they have special access to that plan. And it takes the little squabbles that you and I might have in the course of our daily lives, and it projects them out to the universe. This should bring back to your mind Peter Berger and his Sacred Canopy. It basically projects out and says, we have to engage in violence and conflict here as a way to make sure that this greater cosmic vision continues to play out, and that this greater cosmic moral order is secure. There's usually one central leader, usually kind of some sort of strong or charismatic leader in these groups. Think Osama bin Laden for the group that we're most familiar with, that being Al-Qaeda. Some other ideas that are involved is usually these groups see society as soft. So they, in all their religious knowledge and religious experience, them become kind of the arbiters, the judges of how to kind of reform and try to reclaim society, and that usually, or that in these cases, includes violence as a way to kind of expurge the evil and try and kind of start with a clean slate in this social world. Now, one of the things that's interesting about these groups is they have kind of a goal, and their goals is to kind of engage the evil and live their vision. So if you just trace out the case of Al-Qaeda and bin Laden again, then there is a goal, and the 9/11 attacks can very much be seen as basically part of this cosmic vision to try and restore society. But in order to pull it off, the religious groups they think they have to engage the source of the evil. And in doing so, can live out and prove their vision and be a part of this cosmic project to kind of reform the world, or to revolutionize the world. What's really interesting theoretically about this is that after 9/11 happened, Juergensmeyer, who wrote this book, and others said one of the worst things to do in terms of actually fighting a group like this, a religious group that is just using politics for religious reasons, is that they elicit a response. They want a response. A response is evidence to them that they've engaged the evil, that they are kind of an oppressed or isolated group, and it kind of can reanimate or re-enliven a group into its vision if they get a sense that their actions, their violent actions, have been worthwhile in terms of provoking a response from the world. What's interesting about this too is often the political goals of these groups are often incredibly vague, which tells us that really they're much more about religion than they are about politics. Al-Qaeda, for example, had these really vague teachings about trying to restore the caliphate, which is this Islamic structure of leadership that's been gone for quite a long time out of the Middle East, and would be nearly impossible to kind of reunify territorially and governmentally. But it was kind of a vague goal, and they had a vague goal about a vague kind of anti-Jewish plank, if you will, in their platform. But these goals, as unjust as they were, there was no kind of connection between the actions that they were taking, such as knocking the Twin Towers, and actually getting to the goal. The goals kind of floated out there, if you will, as these general kind of motivators. Now, another thing that Juergensmeyer points us towards is that, and the concept of dramaturgy points us towards, is we need to look at the context. So what does the stage of the drama look like? And what does the audience look like? In the case of, just to play out the Al-Qaeda piece, the context is various repressive